This is a story of a widow who loved her son more than her own life. The woman's name was Grace, and her son's name was Marcus. Grace was a mother who gave everything for her only child. Not just her time, not just her money. She gave him her legs. Her son Marcus was her whole world, the center of her universe, the reason she woke up every morning and wheeled herself to work even when her body screamed in pain. But soon that same son would look at his own mother, sitting in her wheelchair, a wheelchair she was in because of him, and say words that would shatter her heart into a million pieces. I promise you don't want to skip this powerful emotional journey packed with life-changing lessons that will stay with you long after the final word. So get comfortable and prepare to be moved as we dive into this unforgettable story of sacrifice, betrayal, and the unbreakable power of a mother's love. And if you're just tuning into our channel for the first time, please subscribe, turn on your notification bell, and don't forget to give this story a thumbs up if it touches your heart. Grace was 68 years old widow. She lived in a small, neat house on a quiet street. Grace woke up the same way she had woken up every morning for the past 20 years, with her hands reaching for the cold metal armrests of her wheelchair before her eyes even opened. It sat beside her bed like an old friend, patient and faithful, waiting for her the way it always did. The leather seat was worn soft from years of use, and the chrome had dulled to a gentle silver, but she kept it clean. She kept everything clean. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains of her modest home, casting pale gold rectangles across the wooden floor. It was a small house, just 4 rooms, but it was hers. She had paid off the mortgage 12 years ago, back when her fingers could still fly across a sewing machine for 10 hours straight without cramping. Now those same fingers moved slower, but they still moved. That was what mattered. Grace transferred herself from bed to wheelchair with the practiced ease of someone who had done it 10,000 times. Her arms were still strong, stronger than most people expected when they looked at her. They had to be. When your legs stopped working, your arms learned to carry the weight of your whole life. She wheeled herself to the bathroom first, navigating the doorway that her late husband Harold had widened himself, back when they still thought the wheelchair might be temporary. That was before the doctors used words like permanent and irreversible, before hope became something she had to redefine rather than abandon. In the mirror, she studied her reflection the way she did every morning, not out of vanity, but out of a quiet kind of inventory. Her hair had gone silver years ago, a soft gray that she used to keep styled and pretty for Harold. After he passed, she stopped bothering with curlers and pins. Now it was simply clean, brushed back from her face, practical. Her skin had gathered wrinkles around her eyes and mouth, maps of a life lived hard but lived fully. She was 68 years old and she looked every year of it. She had earned every line. The hallway from her bedroom to the kitchen was lined with photographs. This was her gallery, her museum of pride. There was Marcus at 5 years old, gap-toothed and grinning on his first day of kindergarten. Marcus at 12, holding up a spelling bee trophy almost as big as his head. Marcus at 18, handsome in his graduation cap and gown, the tassel she had paid for by taking on 3 extra wedding dress alterations that month. Marcus at 25, shaking hands with the dean as he received his MBA. Every photograph was dusted, every frame polished. This hallway was a temple, and her son was the deity enshrined within it. Grace paused at one photograph near the kitchen doorway. It was older than the others, slightly faded, the colors bleeding toward sepia. In it, a younger Grace stood on 2 strong legs beside Harold, both of them beaming, while a small Marcus sat perched on his father's shoulders. That was taken 3 months before the accident, 3 months before everything changed. She didn't linger on the photograph. She never did. Some memories were too heavy to carry for long. The kitchen was Grace's sanctuary. It had been modified over the years. Lower countertops, pull-out shelves, everything within reach of her seated position. But the heart of it remained unchanged. The same old stove where she had taught herself to cook after her mother passed. The same worn wooden table where she and Harold had shared 1,000 meals. The same window that looked out over a small backyard where Marcus used to play. Today was special. Marcus had called 2 days ago, his voice bright with excitement, saying he was coming to visit and bringing someone he wanted her to meet. A girlfriend, No, a fiancé. Grace's heart had nearly burst through her chest at the word. Her son was getting married. Her baby boy had found someone to love. She had spent all of yesterday preparing. The house was spotless, every surface wiped down, every pillow fluffed. She had washed the good china, the set her mother had given her for her own wedding, the set she only used for the most important occasions. And this morning, she had woken up at 5 to start on her famous sweet potato pie. The pie sat cooling on the counter now, its surface a perfect golden brown, the kitchen still warm and fragrant with cinnamon and nutmeg. Grace had made this pie for every important moment in Marcus's life: his birthdays, his graduations, his first job, his promotions. It was more than dessert, it was tradition, it was love made edible. She looked down at her hands as she rested them on the kitchen table. They were weathered hands, mapped with veins and spotted with age, the knuckles slightly swollen from years of needlework. These hands had sewn hundreds of wedding dresses, christening gowns, and prom outfits. They had hemmed pants and mended tears and embroidered initials onto handkerchiefs. Even after the accident, even from her wheelchair, she had found ways to keep working. Because Marcus needed her to. Because giving up was never an option when you had a child counting on you. She had never told Marcus how much it hurt. The late nights hunched over fabric when her back screamed for rest. The customers who looked at her wheelchair and wondered if she could really do quality work. The times she had to swallow her pride and ask neighbors for help reaching things on high shelves. She had kept all of that hidden, locked away in a place he would never see. A mother's job was to shield her child from pain, not burden him with it. Grace wheeled herself to the living room window and looked out at the street. Marcus would be arriving soon. He was bringing this woman, Veronica he had called her, to meet his mother, to get her blessing maybe, to show off the home where he grew up, humble as it was. She glanced around the room, suddenly self-conscious. The furniture was old but well-maintained. The carpet was clean but showing its age. The walls could use a fresh coat of paint. Would this Veronica see a home full of love, or would she see poverty? Would she see a dignified woman who had raised a remarkable son against all odds? Or would she see a crippled old woman in a creaking wheelchair? Grace pushed the thought away. It didn't matter what anyone else saw. She knew who she was. She knew what she had sacrificed, and she knew that everything she had ever done, every stitch she had sewn, every pain she had endured, every night she had gone without so Marcus could have more. All of it had been worth it. Her son was successful. Her son was getting married. Her son was happy. That was all that mattered. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway made her heart leap. Grace smoothed down her dress, a nice burgundy one she had made herself years ago, still her best, and positioned her wheelchair to face the door. She folded her weathered hands in her lap and waited, a smile already spreading across her face. Her son was home, and in just a few moments she would meet the woman he had chosen to spend his life with. Grace had no way of knowing that this visit, this joyful, long-awaited visit, would change everything. That by the time Marcus and his fiancée left her home, her heart would be lying in pieces on the floor, shattered by words she never imagined her own son could say. But for now, in this moment, she was simply a mother waiting to embrace her child, and her sweet potato pie was cooling on the counter, ready to welcome him home. The first year after the accident was the hardest. Grace had spent 3 months in the hospital, another 4 in rehabilitation, learning how to exist in a body that had betrayed her. The doctors had been gentle but honest. The damage to her spine was permanent. She would never walk again. She was 34 years old, a widow with a 12-year-old son, and suddenly the world had become a series of obstacles she could no longer navigate. James had died just 8 months before the accident, pancreatic cancer, swift and merciless. He had been the breadwinner, the steady hand, the man who made Grace feel like anything was possible. His death had left her reeling, struggling to find her footing as a single mother. And then, before she could even catch her breath, the accident had taken her legs too. There were nights in those early months when Grace wanted to give up. She would lie in bed in the darkness, listening to Marcus sleeping in the next room, and wonder how she was supposed to do this. How was she supposed to raise a child, pay bills, survive, when she couldn't even stand up to make breakfast? The disability settlement from the accident would help, but it wouldn't last forever. She needed to work. She needed to provide. She needed to be both mother and father to a boy who had already lost too much. So Grace did what she had always done. She refused to surrender. She started with what she knew. Her mother had taught her to sew as a girl, and Grace had always had a gift for it. Steady hands, an eye for detail, the patience to unpick a crooked seam and start again. In the weeks after she came home from rehabilitation, she set up a small sewing station by the window of their cramped apartment. She put an ad in the local paper: alterations and mending, reasonable rates, pickup and delivery available. The first customer was a neighbor who needed pants hemmed. Grace charged her $3 and spent an hour making sure every stitch was perfect. Word spread. Within 6 months, Grace had more work than she could handle. She expanded her services, not just alterations, but custom pieces, curtains and pillows and Halloween costumes, wedding dress modifications that required surgical precision. She worked from dawn until her fingers cramped, and then she worked some more. Every dollar she earned went into the same place: Marcus's future. But sewing alone wasn't enough. Marcus was brilliant. Everyone said so. His teachers raved about his potential, his quick mind, his natural leadership. He deserved opportunities that public school couldn't provide. So Grace found more work. She took a job as a phone operator for an insurance company, working the late shift from home after Marcus went to bed. She taught herself bookkeeping and began doing accounts for small businesses in the neighborhood. She slept 4 hours a night and told herself it was enough. The private school tuition was $8,000 a year. Grace didn't have $8,000, but she had determination, and she had hands that could work miracles, and she had a son who was going to have every chance she could give him. She took out a loan. She picked up extra sewing jobs. She sold the car James had left her because she couldn't drive it anyway, and she used the money to pay for Marcus's first semester. Marcus never knew how close they came to losing everything. He never knew about the months when Grace skipped meals so he could have seconds. He never knew about the night she pawned her wedding ring to make rent, then worked double shifts for 3 months to buy it back. He never knew that his mother had cried herself to sleep more times than she could count, her body screaming with exhaustion, her heart heavy with fear, her mind racing with calculations that never quite added up. All Marcus knew was that he had everything he needed: good schools, new clothes, a mother who smiled at him every morning and told him he could be anything he wanted to be. The years passed and Marcus rose. He graduated valedictorian from the private high school Grace's needle and thread had paid for. He was accepted to a prestigious university with a partial scholarship, but partial wasn't full, and Grace took out more loans to cover the difference. She never told Marcus about those loans. She never told him that she had refinanced the house twice, that she had depleted the last of the disability settlement, that every luxury in his life was a sacrifice in hers. When Marcus graduated college summa cum laude, Grace was there in the audience, sitting in her 20-year-old wheelchair, weeping with pride. When he got his first job at the investment firm, she took him out to dinner at the nicest restaurant she could afford and told him his father would have been so proud. When he told her he wanted to start his own business, she went to the bank and co-signed a loan she could never repay if he failed, putting her house up as collateral without a moment's hesitation. Marcus's business succeeded. Of course it did. He was brilliant, just like everyone had always said. Within 3 years, he had a corner office and a luxury apartment and a German car that cost more than Grace's house. He sent her money sometimes, which she quietly put into a savings account she never touched. He called her on Sundays, though the calls had grown shorter over the years. He visited when he could, though his visits had grown rarer. And Grace watched her sons rise from her old wheelchair, the same one she had been using since the accident, and felt nothing but gratitude. The chrome was worn in places now. The cushion had been replaced so many times she'd lost count. The wheels squeaked slightly no matter how much she oiled them. She could have asked Marcus for a new one. She could have used some of that money he sent, but there was always something more important: a property tax bill, a repair on the house, a wedding gift for a friend's daughter. Her needs could wait. They always could. Now, as Grace waited for her son to walk through that door, she thought about all the years that had brought them to this moment, every sleepless night, every aching morning, Every stitch sewn in call answered and ledger balanced, every piece of herself she had given away so that Marcus could have more. She had built his success with her own two hands from a wheelchair that had tried to define her limits but had never succeeded. She heard the car door slam outside. Marcus's expensive German sedan, a sound so different from the old Toyota James used to drive. Her heart swelled with love and pride. Whatever her son had become, whoever he brought through that door, she would welcome them with open arms. That was what mothers did. That was what she had always done. Grace had given Marcus everything: her youth, her health, her mobility. Her entire life had been an offering laid at the altar of his future. She just never imagined he might one day be ashamed of the gift. The woman who walked through Grace's door was the most beautiful creature she had ever seen. Veronica moved like water flowing downhill, effortless, graceful, inevitable. She was tall and slender, with skin the color of warm honey and cheekbones that could cut glass. Her black hair fell in perfect waves past her shoulders, and her makeup was so flawless it looked like she had stepped out of a magazine cover. She wore a cream-colored designer dress that probably cost more than Grace earned in a month, and diamonds sparkled at her ears and throat and wrist. Behind her, Marcus was beaming. He looked so handsome in his tailored navy blazer, so proud, so happy. Grace's heart swelled at the sight of him. Her boy, her beautiful, successful boy, bringing home the woman he loved. "Mom," Marcus said, stepping forward to kiss her cheek, "this is Veronica, my fiancée." Fiancé. The word hung in the air like music. Grace felt tears spring to her eyes. Happy tears, the best kind. Her son was getting married. All those years of sacrifice, all those prayers whispered in the darkness. And now this. A wedding, a daughter-in-law. Maybe someday, grandchildren. "Oh, my darling," Grace said, wheeling herself forward with her arms open. "Welcome. Welcome to our family." Veronica's smile flickered. It was subtle, so subtle that Grace almost missed it. But it was there. A momentary tightening around the eyes, a barely perceptible step backward. Her gaze dropped to Grace's wheelchair, traveled across the worn chrome and the patched cushion, and something shifted in her expression. It was gone in an instant, replaced by a smile that showed all her perfect white teeth, but didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's lovely to meet you, Mrs." Veronica paused, looking at Marcus. "Just call me Grace," Grace said warmly, still holding her arms open. "Please, we're going to be family." Veronica leaned down and gave Grace a hug that barely qualified as contact, a brief, stiff pressing of bodies that ended almost before it began. Grace caught a whiff of expensive perfume, something French and sophisticated, before Veronica straightened and stepped back to Marcus's side. "Please come in, sit down," Grace said, gesturing toward the living room. "I've made pie, Marcus's favorite, sweet potato, and I have tea, or coffee if you prefer, and—" "Actually," Veronica said, her voice smooth as silk, "we can't stay long. We have a dinner reservation at 7. She glanced around the modest living room, her eyes cataloging the hand-crocheted blanket, the photographs in their simple frames, the furniture that was clean and well-maintained but obviously old. Her gaze lingered on the ramp that led from the front door, the widened doorways, the grab bars visible in the hallway leading to the bathroom. Grace felt something cold settle in her stomach, but she pushed it aside. The girl was probably just nervous. Meeting your fiancé's mother was stressful, and clearly Veronica came from money. The way she dressed, the way she carried herself, the way she looked at Grace's humble home, like she had accidentally wandered into a museum exhibit on how the other half lived. "Just a small slice, then," Grace said, already wheeling toward the kitchen. "You can't leave without trying my pie. Marcus, tell her about my pie." "Mom's pie is legendary," Marcus said, but there was something strange in his voice. He wasn't looking at Grace. He was looking at Veronica, watching her reaction, his expression tight with something Grace couldn't quite identify. Anxiety, maybe, or embarrassment. She pushed that thought away too. Grace returned with 3 slices of pie on her best plates, balanced carefully on a tray across her wheelchair's armrests. Veronica had not sat down. She stood near the door, her designer handbag still clutched in her manicured fingers, as if she might need to make a quick escape. "Here we are," Grace said brightly. "Veronica, please, have a seat. Tell me everything. How did you two meet? When is the wedding? I want to hear all of it." Veronica took the plate Grace offered but didn't sit. She held the pie like it was a suspicious package, her fork hovering but never actually touching the food. "We met at a charity gala," she said. "My father's foundation. Marcus was there representing his firm." "Her father is Richard Ashford," Marcus added. "Ashford Industries." The name meant nothing to Grace, but the way Marcus said it, with a kind of breathless reverence, made it clear she should be impressed. She smiled and nodded, watching Veronica not eat her pie. "The wedding is in 3 months," Veronica said. "June 15th, at the Ashford estate. My mother is handling most of the arrangements. She has exquisite taste." She paused. "It's going to be quite the event. Very elegant. 300 guests." "How wonderful," Grace said, her heart racing with excitement. She was already imagining it. Her son at the altar, the flowers, the music. She would need to find something to wear. Maybe she could make herself a dress, something elegant but not too flashy. She didn't want to embarrass Marcus in front of all those important people. "The venue is absolutely stunning," Veronica continued, and now she was looking at Grace's wheelchair again, that same flicker of discomfort crossing her perfect features. "Though I should mention, there are some accessibility issues. The main hall is up a flight of stairs, and the gardens where the ceremony will be held, well, the terrain is quite uneven. Cobblestones, you know. Very historic, very beautiful. But not exactly—" She trailed off, gesturing vaguely at Grace's chair. The cold feeling in Grace's stomach grew heavier. "I'm sure we can work something out," she said carefully. "I've gotten quite good at navigating difficult terrain over the years. And Marcus can help me, can't you, sweetheart?" Marcus didn't answer. He was staring at his shoes. "We should really get going," Veronica said, setting down her untouched pie. "The reservation. You understand?" She turned to Marcus and placed a possessive hand on his arm. "Sweetheart, we don't want to be late." "Of course," Grace said, the word tasting strange in her mouth. She watched her son kiss her cheek again. Watch this beautiful, cold woman drift back toward the door without having sat down, without having eaten a single bite of pie, without having asked Grace a single question about herself, or her life, or her story. At the door, Veronica paused and turned back. Her smile was radiant and empty. "It was so nice to meet you, Grace. Marcus talks about you all the time." It was a lie. Grace could see it in Veronica's eyes, hear it in the practiced smoothness of her voice. But she smiled anyway, because that was what mothers did. They smiled through the worry. They smiled through the fear. They smiled even when something dark and heavy was settling into their hearts. The door closed behind them, and Grace sat alone in her wheelchair, in her modest home, surrounded by the smell of sweet potato pie that no one had touched. She told herself it would be fine. She told herself Veronica was just nervous, just different, just not used to people like Grace. But deep in her heart, in the place where a mother's instincts never lie, Grace knew something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. They came back 2 weeks later. Grace had spent those 14 days in a fog of anxious preparation, convincing herself that she had misread the situation, that Veronica was simply nervous, that everything would be fine once they got to know each other. She had started making her dress, a beautiful deep burgundy fabric that she'd been saving for a special occasion. Mother of the groom. She would be mother of the groom. When Marcus called to say they were coming over, Grace baked another pie. She cleaned the house until it gleamed. She put on her best blouse, the silk one she usually saved for church, and even put on a little lipstick, something she rarely did anymore. She wanted to look nice. She wanted Veronica to see that she could fit into their world, even from a wheelchair. The moment they walked through the door, Grace knew something was different. Marcus wouldn't meet her eyes. His jaw was tight, his shoulders tense, and he kept glancing at Veronica like a soldier waiting for orders. Veronica herself looked perfectly composed, her smile fixed in place like a mask, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood as she walked into the living room like she owned it. "Mom," Marcus said, his voice strange and hollow, "we need to talk." Grace felt her heart stumble. Of course, sweetheart. Sit down. I made pie. We're not staying for pie, Veronica interrupted, still standing, still not sitting in Grace's home. This will only take a moment. Marcus took a breath. He was staring at a spot on the wall just above Grace's head, unable or unwilling to look at her face. Mom, Veronica and I have been talking. About the wedding. About the guest list. He paused, swallowed. About you. About me. Grace's voice came out small. The thing is... Marcus ran a hand over his face. He looked like a man about to step off a cliff. The thing is, Mom, this wedding is really important. To both of us. To Veronica's family. There are going to be a lot of influential people there. Business contacts, potential investors, people who could make or break my career. I understand, Grace said slowly, though she didn't. Not yet. I'll be on my best behavior. I won't embarrass you, Marcus. I promise. Something flickered across Marcus's face. Pain, maybe, or shame. But it was gone before Grace could name it. He finally looked at her, and his eyes were the eyes of a stranger. Mom, he said, at your age, and with your condition, we think it would be better if you didn't come. The words didn't make sense. Grace heard them, but her brain refused to process them. What do you mean, didn't come? Didn't come where? To the wedding, Mom. Marcus's voice was flat now, rehearsed like he had practiced this speech in the mirror. You're too... Look, the venue isn't wheelchair accessible. There are stairs everywhere. The ceremony is in the garden, and the ground is uneven. It would be a whole production trying to accommodate you, and we just don't think... Marcus, Grace's voice cracked. Are you telling me I can't come to my own son's wedding? The silence that followed was the loudest sound Grace had ever heard. Veronica stepped forward, placing a manicured hand on Marcus's arm. What Marcus is trying to say, she said, her voice smooth as poison, is that this is going to be a very sophisticated event. Very elegant. Very polished. My family has a certain image to maintain, and frankly, having someone in a wheelchair rolling around would be... She paused, searching for the word. Distracting. People would stare. It would take away from the ceremony. Grace felt like she had been slapped. Distracting? Mom, please, Marcus said, and now there was desperation in his voice, though Grace couldn't tell if it was desperation for her to understand or desperation to get this over with. Look at yourself. Look at... He gestured at her wheelchair, at her body, at everything she was. You're 68 years old. You're crippled. You can't even walk. What are people supposed to think when they see the groom's mother being wheeled around like some kind of... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Crippled. The word hung in the air between them. Sharp as a blade. Her son, her baby, the child she had carried and nursed and raised and sacrificed everything for, had just called her crippled, had just told her she was too broken, too shameful, too embarrassing to watch him get married. Grace felt something inside her begin to crack. Not break, not yet, but crack, like ice on a frozen lake just before it gives way. Marcus, she whispered, do you know why I'm in this wheelchair? He shifted uncomfortably. Mom, this isn't about... Do you remember, Grace continued, her voice steady despite the tears now streaming down her face, what happened when you were 12 years old? Marcus went very still. We were crossing the street, Grace said, the memories flooding back. The screech of tires, the flash of metal, the terrible knowledge that there was no time. You were walking ahead of me, showing me something on your phone. You didn't see the car run the red light, but I did. Veronica was frowning now, looking between Grace and Marcus with something like impatience. What does this have to do with anything? Grace ignored her. Her eyes were locked on her son. I pushed you out of the way, Marcus. I pushed you, and the car hit me instead. I remember flying through the air. I remember the sound my spine made when it shattered against the pavement. I remember lying there, unable to feel my legs, unable to move, and the only thought in my head was, is my son okay? Is Marcus alive? The room had gone absolutely silent. Even Veronica had stopped fidgeting. This wheelchair, Grace said, gripping the worn armrest with hands that had sewn 10,000 garments to pay for her son's dreams, is not my weakness, Marcus. It's the price I paid for your life. These legs that don't work, I traded them for you. Every single day I have spent in this chair for the last 20 years, every struggle, every indignity, every moment of pain, I have never once regretted it. Because you were alive. Because you were worth it. She looked at her son, really looked at him, and saw for the first time a stranger wearing her child's face. But now I wonder, she said softly, if I made a mistake. A strange calm settled over Grace. It was the calm of a woman who had finally stopped pretending, who had finally seen the truth she had been refusing to see for years. The tears on her cheeks dried. Her hands stopped trembling. Something inside her that had been stretched to breaking finally snapped. Not into hysteria, but into clarity. Marcus and Veronica stood frozen, watching her. Marcus's face had gone pale at the story of the accident, at the reminder of what his mother had sacrificed. But even now, even after hearing it, he hadn't moved toward her. He hadn't apologized. He was still standing next to Veronica, his loyalty carved in stone on the wrong side of the room. You know, Grace said, her voice eerily calm, I always told myself it didn't matter if you remembered the details of that day. You were only 12. It was traumatic. The mind protects itself from things too painful to hold. But I see now that it's not that you forgot, Marcus. It's that you chose to forget. Because remembering would mean acknowledging what I gave up for you, and that would make it harder for you to be ashamed of me. Mom, Marcus started, but Grace held up her hand. I'm not finished. Her voice was quiet but carried an authority that made both of them go still. For 20 years I have given you everything. Everything, Marcus. Do you have any idea what that means? She wheeled herself to the small desk in the corner of the living room, where she kept her important papers. Her fingers found the folder she was looking for, the one she had hoped she would never need to open. Your apartment, she said, pulling out a mortgage statement. That beautiful luxury apartment you live in with the doorman and the view of the city? I co-signed that mortgage. Your credit wasn't good enough to qualify on your own. Did you know that? My name is on that loan. I've been making half the payments for the past 3 years because you told me your business was still growing and you needed a little more time. I never asked for a single dollar back. Marcus's face went from pale to gray. Your business. Grace pulled out another document. That startup you're so proud of, the one you brag about at parties. I put up my house as collateral for your initial loan. My house, Marcus. The house I've lived in for 18 years. The house I worked my fingers to the bone to keep. If your business fails, I lose everything. Veronica was staring at Marcus with something new in her eyes. Not love, but calculation. Grace saw it and understood. This girl had thought she was marrying money. She was only now realizing that her fiancé's success was built on a foundation of his mother's sacrifice. Your credit cards. Grace's voice was relentless now. I'm listed as an authorized user on 2 of them, which means my credit history has been propping up your score for years. Without me, your credit rating would be half what it is today. She set the folder down and looked at her son, the boy she had raised, the man she had created with her own 2 hands and her broken body. I did all of this because I loved you, she said simply, because I believed in you, because I thought that if I just gave enough, sacrificed enough, you would grow into a man worthy of that sacrifice. But I see now that I was wrong. I gave you everything, and you used it to build a life where you're too ashamed to be seen with your own mother. Mom, please, Marcus's voice cracked. I didn't mean... You called me crippled. Grace's words cut through his excuses like a scalpel. You looked at the wheelchair I've been in for 20 years, a wheelchair I'm in because I saved your life, and you called me crippled. You said I would embarrass you, that I would be a distraction at your wedding. She paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the room. So here is what's going to happen. Grace's voice was calm, final. You want a life without your crippled mother in it? You can have it. Starting today, I'm removing my name from your mortgage. I'm removing my name from your business loan. I'm removing myself from your credit cards. I'm not paying another cent toward your apartment, your business, or your lifestyle. You can't, Veronica started, her face twisted with sudden panic. I can, Grace said. not even looking at her. And I am. As of this moment, Marcus, you are on your own. You want to build a life without me? Build it with your own hands. Prove that you can stand on your own 2 feet, since apparently that matters so much to you and your fiancé. Marcus looked like he had been punched in the stomach. Mom, you don't understand. If you do this, I'll lose everything. The apartment, the business. Then I suppose you'll learn what it feels like, Grace said quietly, to lose everything. She turned her wheelchair toward the door. I think you should leave now. You have a wedding to plan. A sophisticated, elegant, distraction-free wedding. I hope it's everything you dreamed of. Mom, please. Marcus reached toward her. Grace didn't turn around. Goodbye, Marcus. The door closed behind them with a sound like a coffin lid. Grace sat alone in her living room, surrounded by photographs of a son she no longer recognized. And for the first time in 20 years, she let herself grieve not for her legs, but for the boy she had lost long before today. The sweet potato pie sat untouched on the counter. Grace wheeled herself to the kitchen, picked up the pie dish, and slowly, deliberately, scraped the whole thing into the trash. Some things once broken could never be eaten again. Marcus married Veronica on a perfect June afternoon beneath a canopy of white roses at the Ashford estate. The sun was golden, the guests were elegant, and everything was exactly as Veronica had planned. 300 of the city's most influential people watched as Marcus slipped a platinum band onto his bride's finger, sealing a union built on ambition and appearances. The mother of the groom was not in attendance. When guests asked about her, Marcus had a rehearsed answer ready. She wasn't feeling well. Her health, you know. He said it with just the right amount of concern in his voice, just the right touch of sadness in his eyes. Veronica would squeeze his hand supportively, and the guests would nod with sympathy and move on to the champagne. No one questioned it. No one asked to send flowers or a card. The woman in the wheelchair simply didn't exist in this world of crystal chandeliers and designer gowns. The reception was a triumph. Veronica's father, Richard Ashford, gave a toast praising Marcus as the son I never had. A man of ambition, of vision, of impeccable character. Marcus stood tall and proud, accepting congratulations from business leaders and socialites, feeling for the first time like he truly belonged in this world. The world his mother's sacrifice had built for him, though he had conveniently forgotten that part. The honeymoon was 2 weeks in the Maldives, private villas over crystal clear water, dinners that cost more than most people's monthly rent, days spent in paradise with his beautiful new wife. Marcus posted photos to social media, smiling in every frame, hashtags proclaiming his perfect life. Not once did he think about the woman sitting alone in her modest home, in her old wheelchair, wondering if she had made the right choice. Grace did not watch the wedding. She did not look at the photos. She spent June 15th the same way she had spent every day since closing the door on her son's face, working at her sewing table, filling orders, keeping her hands busy so her mind wouldn't wander to dark places. The burgundy dress she had started making hung unfinished in her closet. She couldn't bear to look at it. True to her word, Grace had made the calls. She had removed her name from Marcus's accounts, withdrawn her guarantees, stopped the payments that had been invisibly propping up his lifestyle. The bankers had been surprised. The creditors had been concerned. But Grace had been resolute. Her son wanted independence from his crippled mother. He would have it. The first domino fell 3 days after Marcus returned from his honeymoon. He came home to his luxury apartment, still sun-kissed from the Maldives, still floating on the high of his perfect wedding, and found an envelope taped to his door. The return address was his bank. The contents were a notice of default. Without Grace's monthly contributions, he had missed payments he didn't even know existed. The bank was initiating foreclosure proceedings. Marcus stared at the letter, certain there had been some mistake. He called the bank, he argued, he demanded to speak to supervisors. But the numbers didn't lie. He had been living beyond his means for years, and the only reason he hadn't drowned was because his mother had been secretly keeping him afloat. Now he was sinking. He didn't tell Veronica, not at first. He scrambled to find solutions, called business contacts, reached out to investors, tried to secure new lines of credit. But without his mother's backing, his credit worthiness had plummeted. Banks that had once welcomed him now treated him like a liability. Doors that had always been open suddenly slammed shut. The second domino fell a week later when his business partners called an emergency meeting. They had learned about the credit changes, they had done their own digging, and they had discovered something that made Marcus's blood run cold. The entire foundation of his business success had been built on guarantees provided by a 68-year-old woman in a wheelchair. "We trusted you," his lead partner said, sliding a buyout agreement across the table. "We thought you were self-made. Turns out you were mama-made." The contempt in his voice was unmistakable. "Sign this, take what's left, and don't ever contact us again." Marcus signed. What choice did he have? That night, he finally told Veronica everything. He told her about the foreclosure, the business collapse, the credit destruction. He told her about his mother. The real story, not the sanitized version he had been peddling to her family. He told her about the wheelchair, about the accident, about the woman who had given up her legs to save his life, and then given up everything else to build him a future he didn't deserve. Veronica listened in silence. When he finished, she stood up, walked to the bedroom, and began packing a suitcase. "Where are you going?" Marcus asked, panic rising in his chest. "To my parents' house." She didn't look at him. "My father will want to hear this. All of it." The door closed behind her, and Marcus sat alone in his luxury apartment, the apartment he was about to lose, surrounded by wedding gifts he couldn't return, and photographs of a honeymoon that already felt like ancient history. The storm was just beginning. Richard Ashford's study smelled of old leather and expensive cigars. It was a room designed to intimidate, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a mahogany desk the size of a small boat, and oil paintings of Ashford ancestors staring down with disapproval. Marcus had been in this room once before, on the day he asked for Veronica's hand. Richard had shaken his hand and called him son. Now Richard looked at him like something scraped off the bottom of a shoe. "Let me understand this correctly," Richard said, his voice cold as Arctic wind. "Your mother, a woman in a wheelchair, sacrificed her ability to walk to save your life. She then spent 20 years working herself to the bone to fund your education, your business, your entire existence. And you repaid her by telling her she was too crippled to attend your wedding." Marcus opened his mouth to explain, to defend himself, but Richard held up a hand. "I have built my fortune on one principle above all others: character. A man who would abandon his own mother, a disabled mother who gave everything for him, has no character. He is despicable. He is beneath contempt." Richard stood and walked to the door. "You will receive annulment papers within the week. My daughter will not remain married to a man who treats his mother like garbage. Get out of my house." The annulment was filed 4 days later. Marcus's marriage had lasted exactly 19 days. After that, the dominoes fell faster than Marcus could count them. The eviction notice became a reality. He had 30 days to vacate the apartment he could no longer afford. His business partners completed their buyout, leaving him with barely enough to cover his mounting debts. The German car was repossessed when he missed 2 payments. The bank froze his accounts pending an investigation into his suddenly destroyed credit. He called his friends. The ones who had clapped him on the back at his wedding, who had toasted to his success, who had laughed at his jokes and admired his rise. One by one, they made excuses. "Sorry, man, things are tight right now. Wish I could help, but you understand. Maybe try calling someone else." The truth spread through their social circle like wildfire. Marcus, the golden boy, the self-made success story, it was all a lie. His crippled mother had built everything, and he had thrown her away like trash. No one wanted to be associated with that kind of man. No one wanted his shame to rub off on them. Marcus sold everything. The designer suits went to a consignment shop for pennies on the dollar. The Rolex his mother had saved for 3 years to buy him for his college graduation sold to a pawn shop that didn't ask questions. The furniture, the electronics, the artwork that had made his apartment feel like a palace, all of it liquidated in a desperate attempt to stay afloat. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. He found a room in a boarding house on the worst side of the city, a cramped studio with stained walls and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. The bathroom was down the hall, shared with 6 other tenants. The mattress sagged in the middle and smelled of mildew. At night, Marcus could hear sirens and shouting and the constant rumble of traffic that never seemed to stop. He got a job at a warehouse, the only place that would hire him without a reference or a credit check. The work was brutal. 12-hour shifts hauling boxes, loading trucks, stacking pallets until his muscles screamed for mercy. The pay was barely enough to cover his rent and a few cheap meals. His hands, once soft and manicured, became rough with calluses. His back, once straight and proud, bent under the weight of endless labor. Every morning Marcus woke in pain. His shoulders ached. His knees throbbed. His lower back felt like someone had driven a spike through it during the night. He would drag himself out of bed, pull on work clothes that were never quite clean, and shuffle to the bus stop to begin another day of physical punishment. And somewhere in the haze of exhaustion and regret, a terrible realization began to dawn. This was his mother's life. This was what Grace had endured for 20 years. The constant pain, the endless work, the body that refused to cooperate. Except she had done it from a wheelchair. She had done it with legs that didn't work, with a spine that had been shattered, saving his worthless life. She had done it without complaint, without self-pity, without ever once making him feel like a burden. And he had called her crippled. He had told her she was too broken to watch him get married. He had looked at the woman who had given him everything, including her ability to walk, and seen only something to be ashamed of. Marcus came home from work one night, his body screaming, his spirit crushed, and caught a glimpse of himself in the cracked mirror above the sink. He didn't recognize the man staring back at him. The designer haircut had grown shaggy. The confident smile had been replaced by hollow exhaustion. The eyes that had once sparkled with ambition were now dull with shame. He thought about his mother, probably sitting in her wheelchair at this very moment, doing the same things she had done every day for 2 decades, surviving, working, enduring. He thought about the scar on her soul that he had inflicted, a wound far deeper than any physical injury. Marcus sank onto his sagging mattress and put his head in his calloused hands. For the first time since childhood, he wept, not for what he had lost, the money, the status, the wife. He wept for what he had done. He wept for the mother he had broken. He wept for the man he had become. And somewhere in the depths of his despair, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to become someone else. 6 months had passed since Marcus's world collapsed. 6 months of warehouse shifts and aching muscles. 6 months of cold showers in shared bathrooms and meals that came from cans. 6 months of becoming someone he didn't recognize. Someone humbled, someone broken, someone who was finally beginning to understand the weight of what he had done. It was a Thursday evening in December when Marcus found himself walking through streets he hadn't visited in half a year. He didn't plan it. His shift had ended early. A busted conveyor belt had shut down his section of the warehouse. And instead of taking the bus back to his cramped room, he had started walking. His feet carried him through neighborhoods that grew gradually more familiar, past the corner store where his mother used to send him for milk, past the park where he had learned to ride a bike, past the church where his father's funeral had been held. And then, without quite knowing how he got there, Marcus was standing across the street from his mother's house. The winter sun had already set, and the street was quiet in that particular way. Suburban streets get after dinner, porch lights glowing, televisions flickering behind curtains, the occasional dog barking in the distance. His mother's house looked exactly as it always had. The same neat yard, now dusted with a light frost. The same wheelchair ramp leading to the front door. The same warm light spilling from the kitchen window. Marcus stood in the shadows of an old oak tree, his breath forming small clouds in the cold air, and watched. Through the kitchen window, he could see her, Grace, his mother. She was wheeling herself from the counter to the stove, moving with that same efficient grace she had always possessed. The grace that had given her her name, his grandmother used to say. She was making something, mixing ingredients in a bowl, rolling out dough, and even from across the street, even through the glass, Marcus knew exactly what it was. Sweet potato pie. She was still making her pie. After everything, after the betrayal, after the cruel words, After her own son had called her crippled and told her she was too broken to watch him get married, she was still making her pie, still living her life, still surviving, the way she had survived for 20 years in that wheelchair. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. The memories came flooding back, not the recent ones, not the ugly words and the slammed doors, but older memories, deeper ones. The ones he had buried so far down, he had almost forgotten they existed. He was 12 years old again, walking down the street with his mother on a sunny afternoon. He was showing her something on his phone, a video maybe, or a game he was excited about. He wasn't paying attention to the street. He never paid attention when he was with her, because she was always paying attention for him. She was always watching, always protecting, always keeping him safe. He heard the screech of tires before he understood what was happening. A car, red he remembered now, it was red, had run the light and was barreling toward him. He remembered freezing. He remembered being unable to move, unable to think, unable to do anything except stand there like a statue while death came screaming toward him. And then his mother's hands were on his back, shoving him forward with a strength he didn't know she possessed. He flew through the air, hit the pavement hard, rolled. And behind him, the sound. God, the sound. He had never been able to forget that sound no matter how hard he tried. The sickening thud of metal against flesh. His mother's scream, cut short, and then silence. Terrible, absolute silence. Marcus remembered scrambling to his feet, remembered turning around, remembered seeing his mother lying in the street like a broken doll. Her legs were bent at angles that legs should never bend. Her eyes were open but unfocused, staring at the sky. Blood was pooling beneath her, spreading across the asphalt in a dark tide. He remembered screaming for help. He remembered the ambulance, the sirens, the paramedics who wouldn't let him ride with her. He remembered sitting in the hospital waiting room for hours, covered in his mother's blood, praying to a God he wasn't sure he believed in. And he remembered the first time he saw her after surgery. She was lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed, her lower body immobilized in a complicated apparatus of metal and straps. She was pale. She was weak. She looked like a ghost of the vibrant woman who had pushed him out of death's path just hours before. But when she saw him walk through the door, she smiled. She actually smiled. "There's my boy," she had whispered, her voice hoarse from the breathing tube they had removed. "My beautiful boy. You're okay. You're okay." Marcus had collapsed beside her bed, sobbing. "I'm sorry, Mama. I'm so sorry. It's my fault. It's all my fault." And his mother who had just lost the use of her legs, who would never walk again, who had sacrificed her body to save his worthless life, had reached out with a trembling hand and stroked his hair. "Don't you ever say that," she had said firmly. "Don't you ever apologize for being alive. I would do it again, Marcus. 1,000 times I would do it again. You are worth everything to me. Everything. You just promise me one thing." "Anything, Mama. Anything. Promise me you'll make me proud. Promise me you'll become someone good, someone kind, someone who makes the world better just by being in it. I promise, Mama, I promise." Standing across the street from her house now, 20 years later, Marcus felt the full weight of that broken promise crash down on him. She had asked for one thing, one single thing, in exchange for her legs, her mobility, her entire life as she had known it, and he had failed her, completely, utterly, unforgivably. Through the window, Grace finished assembling her pie and slid it into the oven. She wiped her hands on a towel, wheeled herself to the small table by the window, and picked up a book. The light caught her face, illuminating features that Marcus could now see clearly: the gray hair, the weathered skin, the lines around her eyes, but also the quiet dignity, the unbroken spirit, the grace that had always defined her. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever, Marcus truly saw his mother. Not as an obstacle or an embarrassment, not as a source of money or support, but as a woman, a hero, a queen who had traded her throne for his future and asked for nothing in return except that he be worthy of the sacrifice. Tears streamed down his face, freezing in the December air. He wanted to run across the street, to pound on her door, to fall at her feet and beg for forgiveness. But he couldn't. Not yet. He wasn't ready. He wasn't worthy. But he would be. Somehow, some way, he would earn the right to stand before her again. He would become the man he had promised to be all those years ago in that hospital room, even if it took the rest of his life. Marcus turned and walked away, leaving his mother's house behind. But this time, he wasn't running from her. He was walking toward something, toward redemption, toward the man he should have been all along. The seasons turned like pages in a book Grace could no longer read clearly. Spring became summer. Summer faded into autumn, and autumn surrendered to winter's chill. Through it all, she sat by her window, watching the world change while she remained still, anchored to her chair, anchored to her hope. Nearly a year had passed since that terrible night when she'd closed the door on her son. 347 days if she was counting, and she was counting, every single one. The physical therapy sessions had become routine now. The doctor's words had proven prophetic. She would never walk again. The damage was too extensive, too permanent. But Grace had learned something in those long months of adjustment. Strength wasn't measured in steps taken, but in mornings faced. And she faced every single one. She'd sold the house. Too many stairs, too many memories in every corner. The small ground floor apartment wasn't much, but it was hers, paid for by the modest settlement from the accident and her disability checks. Mrs. Chen from the church came by twice a week to help with groceries. Pastor Williams visited on Sundays. The community that had once pitied her now simply loved her, and somehow that made all the difference. But there was an empty space at her table, an empty space in her heart. She thought about Marcus every day, wondered where he was, what he was doing, whether he was safe, whether he ever thought of her. The silence between them was a vast ocean, and she didn't know if he would ever find his way across it. Then on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in late November, there was a knock at her door. Grace wheeled herself to the entrance, expecting Mrs. Chen or perhaps a delivery. But when she opened the door, her breath caught in her throat. Marcus stood there, but not the Marcus she remembered. This wasn't the boy in designer clothes with manicured hands and an entitled slouch. The man before her wore simple work clothes, jeans worn at the knees, a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, boots scuffed from honest labor. His hands, hanging awkwardly at his sides, were calloused and rough. His shoulders were broader, his posture humbler, and his eyes held something they'd never held before. Remorse. "Mom," he said, and his voice cracked on the single syllable. For a moment, neither of them moved. Grace felt her heart hammering against her ribs, felt the sting of tears she'd been holding back for 347 days. Then Marcus did something that broke her completely. He dropped to his knees beside her wheelchair, his head level with hers, and took her hands in his own. Those rough, calloused hands that told stories of transformation she couldn't yet imagine. And he wept. Not the petulant tears of a child denied, but the deep, wrenching sobs of a man who had finally understood what he'd lost, what he'd thrown away. "Mom, I am so sorry," he choked out between sobs. "I'm so sorry. For everything I said, for everything I did, for who I was." Grace's own tears were flowing freely now, her hands trembling in his grip. "You're not crippled," Marcus continued, his voice raw and broken. "You're the strongest person I've ever known. This wheelchair, it isn't a symbol of weakness. It's a throne. You're a queen who gave her legs so I could run. And his voice fractured, "and I ran away from you. I ran from the only person who ever loved me unconditionally." "Marcus," Grace whispered, but he shook his head. "No, please, let me finish. I've been practicing this for months." He took a shuddering breath. "When you shut that door, I was so angry. I thought you were being cruel. I thought you didn't love me anymore. But you knew, didn't you? You knew it was the only way." He pulled back slightly, reaching into his jacket pocket. He withdrew a worn envelope, thick with bills, and held it out to her. "I got a job, construction at first. Then I learned some carpentry. I'm working as an apprentice now, learning a trade. It's honest work, Mom, hard work. The kind of work that makes you tired at the end of the day, but proud of what you've built. He pressed the envelope into her hands. This is everything I owe you. Every penny of those $50,000. It took me almost a year of 12-hour days and living in a room the size of a closet, but it's all here. I want to repay you for everything. Grace looked down at the envelope in her lap. She could feel its weight, its significance. This was Marcus's redemption, offered in paper and ink, his journey from boy to man, counted out in bills earned through blistered hands and aching muscles. Then, slowly, deliberately, she set the envelope aside on the small table next to her wheelchair. And she opened her arms. "Welcome home, my son," she whispered. Marcus collapsed into her embrace, and they held each other while the afternoon light slanted through the window, gilding them both in gold. He cried into her shoulder like the child he'd once been, and she stroked his hair with the tenderness she'd never stopped feeling. "Keep it," she said softly when he'd finally quieted. "Use it to build your life, to build your future. That money isn't what I wanted from you." "Then what?" Marcus asked, pulling back to look at her. "What did you want?" "This," Grace said simply, touching his cheek. "You, the real you. Not the boy who measured his worth in dollar signs and brand names, but the man who understands that wealth isn't what you have. It's what you give, what you sacrifice, what you become through loving others more than you love yourself." Marcus shook his head in wonder. "How did you know? How did you know that cutting me off was what I needed?" "Because love sometimes means letting go," Grace replied. "Sometimes it means closing the door so that the person you love can find their own way to open it again. And sometimes," she looked down at her wheelchair, then back at him, "sometimes it means giving up everything you have so that someone else can have a chance." "You gave up your legs for me," Marcus said, his voice barely a whisper, "and I threw it back in your face." "No," Grace corrected gently, "you were lost. But now you're found. That's all that matters." They talked for hours that afternoon, as the light faded and the room grew dark around them. Marcus told her about the past year, about the shock of having nothing, about sleeping in his car for the first week, about the construction foreman who'd given him a chance despite his soft hands and ignorant questions, about learning what it meant to earn something, to sweat for something, to be proud of something you'd built with your own two hands. And Grace listened, her heart filling with a joy she'd almost forgotten was possible. Before he left that evening, Marcus knelt beside her wheelchair one more time. "I'm going to take care of you now," he said firmly. "The way you took care of me. I'm going to work hard, save money, and make sure you have everything you need." Grace smiled, touching his face. "You already have, sweetheart. You already have." As she watched him walk down the path to his truck, an old beat-up thing he'd bought with his own money, Grace understood something profound. Her wheelchair wasn't a prison. It was a monument. Every time Marcus looked at it, he would remember. He would remember sacrifice. He would remember love. He would remember that true strength isn't found in what you can do, but in what you're willing to give up for others. The wheelchair was her throne, just as Marcus had said, and the scars it represented, both visible and invisible, were not marks of shame, but medals of honor. She had given her ability to walk so that her son could learn to stand on his own 2 feet, and in doing so, she had taught him the most important lesson of all. Love is not inheritance that can be repossessed. It is an inheritance of the heart that multiplies with every generation, growing stronger through sacrifice, deeper through trial, and eternal through grace. As darkness fell and the stars emerged one by one above her small apartment, Grace wheeled herself away from the window. She didn't need to watch the road anymore. Her son had come home. Never be ashamed of those who bear the marks of loving you. The wheelchair, the scars, the weathered hands. These are not weaknesses to hide. They are monuments to a love that gave everything. Do you think Grace did the right thing by cutting Marcus off? Was it the only way for him to learn, or was there another path? Let us know in the comments below.